Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter, and Sarah's back
Hello,
this week.
Hi, stomach bug. Woo.
And I appreciate you keeping that at your house.
Hey, I figured you would.
Sharing would not be caring in that situation.
No.
We are
3 kids, 1 bathroom.
Oh yeah, not a good scene. Not a good scene. And Chewy's in the house too.
Yeah.
Looking nice and fresh and beautiful. She's been to the groomer, I see.
Yes, she went last Saturday actually. Got all groomed.
Fancy.
Yeah.
She looks nice.
She needed it badly.
We are going to do this little little vignette of a peony in a little vase with a cup of tea and a couple books. I just thought it felt really nice. It just looked nice. It just looked like cozy and just perfect for a rainy day, I thought. And I just did a quick little color study here, and the colors that we're going to use today are, you can either use, I'm using my Sennelier paints today, so I'm using olive green, but if you are not using Sennelier, or Winsor & Newton, because their olive greens are really close, use sap green. So if you're using M. Graham or olive greens, except for Winsor & Newton and Sennelier, are very muddy. So I just wanted to give you that tip, because your mixes might turn out a little dull if you use an olive green from a different brand. We are going to use either crimson, you can use alizarin crimson, permanent alizarin crimson, not traditional, or carmine. Any sort of pink-based red is going to be fine for this. We're going to use ultramarine blue. If you don't have ultramarine, you can use cobalt, but ultramarine's a little bit stronger of a color. Burnt sienna, and yellow ochre. And of course, if you don't have exactly the same colors as I'm using, just compromise. Like if you don't have yellow ochre, try raw sienna or Naples yellow deep, or look at these colors on the screen and pick whatever you have that's closest. And there is a pattern linked up in the video description. I haven't even got my blog post up for today yet, so I did link everything down below. And I changed the composition a little bit. I thought this would be nice because the weather's really warm here in Maine. It's like, what is it, like 50?
Yeah, when I left the house, my little outside thermometer thing was showing 50.
Yeah, it's like, I had the windows open. It was funny, the oil man came to deliver oil, and I was putting dishes in the dishwasher, and he popped his head in my kitchen window and said, "I'll take a rum and coke, please."
Nice.
Like, well, I got the rum, but I don't have any coke, so I can't help you out there. But yeah, it's so nice. I had everything opened up and airing out, and so nice to have a January thaw. I decided I would put a window here instead of the kind of like the stucco wall that's in the picture, and I thought it'd be nice to have kind of some fabric, some curtains. I thought that would be a nice texture to have in the picture. You can do whatever you want in your painting, though. I just wanted to give you that option. You probably want to tape your painting down. I really didn't have a board that was the right size for this paper. It's kind of an odd size. It's probably about 10 by 11 because I tore it down from a sheet of watercolor paper, but I think this is going to be fine. It's 140 pound and it's 100% cotton, and it's fairly textured, and I find the more texture a paper has, the less it's going to warp. So that's another tip for you when you're looking for paper rather. I find if I'm using a hot press paper, it almost doesn't matter how thick it is. It wants to warp a little bit. You have to kind of go with like a 300 pound hot press paper if you don't want it to warp. But with your rougher papers, even some brands cold press is kind of on the rough side. They just don't warp as much as a smoother paper. The texture helps to even out the tension from the water. I'm going to start off with a little bit of ultramarine, and I'm switching brushes because I'm using half pans. So if I was using my larger palette, I'd probably go right ahead. I could use this or this brush, but when you're working with a half pan, you need a brush that's going to get in the pans. So if you predominantly like to work from half pans, I would recommend getting a brush like this for your wash brush, because you get that, because it holds a lot of paint, but it'll fit in the pans. So I'm going to grab some ultramarine blue and a little bit of burnt sienna to knock down that brightness. It's going to desaturate it a little bit. See that? And we're going to add this up here. Now I decided to leave kind of a rough edge so that I would have kind of just an interesting look. And I just have this on a clipboard because I like to tip this a little bit because I have a lot of bright lights around my desk here, so it's nice and crisp for you guys, but sometimes it glares and you can't see my my sketch, so I just wanted to be able to tip that. I'm not painting over the flower though, I'm just putting it in the window area. I'm I'm going to grab a little bit more blue, so it's not quite so gray. Now also with the cotton paper, you'll notice that it won't, the paint is a little easier to control than if this was a cellulose paper. With a cellulose paper, you're more likely to get that kind of whoosh of color and the blooms. You don't get that quite as much with a cotton paper. Now if I want to give the appearance of maybe some sunshine outside, I can do that by cleaning my brush and grabbing a little yellow ochre. I don't want big gobs, so I'm going to kind of work it into my brush on my palette. And I can add a little bit of that into the mix. Warm it up a little bit. Yellow ochre is a warm earthy yellow, and ultramarine is a warm bright blue, but since they're both warms, they're further away from green on the color wheel, so they don't tend to make green when you put them together. So that's why I can do this without getting a big green sky. Now something else you can do is you can add a little texture if you want. Mod a little bit with a paper towel, just kind of gently. If you press hard, you're going to get like almost like puffy clouds there, but if you just gently kind of roll it on there, you'll just give it a little bit of a soft mottled look. Okay, so I want to tint the fabric a little bit. I think maybe I will do some of my carmine red. So I'll have a very sheer kind of like pink colored curtain. And since my paper's wet, I'm just going to pull some of that into the curtain area. Up and down strokes, because that's how the fabric wrinkles. Now be careful of the edges. We're going to glaze over. That's one of the reasons I picked my Sennelier paints. Now you can use whatever you want, honestly, for this project. But I just knew that if I did get into a lot of glazing on the flower, that I would be able to see my layers really well. They would not get all mushed together. But again, this will be fine with whatever paint you have. But somebody always asks me, why'd you pick this paint for this project instead of that paint? And that's why. I think I'll also add a little yellow ochre into the curtain there. Again, working it so I don't have any big gobs. Yellow ochre is one of those colors that really, I feel, enhances other colors without affecting them too much. And then maybe a little stronger of the pink at the bottom. And just flick it up.
Someone was asking, what was the color mix for the blue? Or what was the blue mix?
That was ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And then after we had that kind of washed in, we added a little yellow ochre to give the appearance of sunlight. And then since you're working on cotton paper, if you want, you can actually wisp. You can wipe up to pull out some highlights. You don't want to do that on the wood pulp paper though, because you will pill it. And I'm just blotting off any red that got inside the mug because the mug is white. Okay, I'm still with that number 12 round, and I'm going to mix up a darker brown. I'm going to go with a burnt sienna and burnt sienna and ultramarine again, but less water. And we're going to make a darker brown here. And this is going to go on the tabletop. Everything's kind of sitting on a cutting board. It's going to go under the cutting board on the tabletop.
Molly McAwesome, when you swatch a paint set, do you mix the colors on the palette or on the paper?
I would just do it right on the paper usually. Just kind of put my wet brush on the palette, pick up the color, and just put it onto my paper. But if I was doing a mixing chart, I would mix it on the palette and then bring it over to the paper. But just to swatch the colors as they come, I would just put it right to the paper. It's okay if it gets a little fuzzy back there, because this is a focus of our painting, so these things are going to be nice and sharp, and everything else can be a little fuzzy, so don't worry if you got some fuzzy lines back there. Now, the cutting board in the photo, the reference photo, it looks like it's half marble with a copper strip and then a lighter wood here on the end. I think I'm just going to make it all wood so that the books show up a little bit better. You can do what you want on your painting, though. That's just what I've chosen to do for mine. So to make that color, I'm simply going to pick up the burnt sienna and mix it into that burnt sienna ultramarine blue mix I just used. And this is just, what we're doing here is just the first wash of color, unifying washes. And I'm not really having much trouble with my paper buckling. I'm standing up and Chewy is like directly underneath me. She's gonna lay down too, she's gonna take a nap.
Yep, one step back and she'll knock you right over, so.
She does like to be conveniently located.
She does.
I don't have any treats up here though.
Studio LM20, do you like the White Knights better or the Sennelier that you're using?
It depends on the project. I think the White Knights are probably a better bargain. That's probably like, as if you're trying to find the least expensive artist grade paints, the White Knights are probably going to be your best bet. I do like the characteristics of the Sennelier. I feel like they granulate a little bit more. Each pigment seems to be a little bit more unique from the next one. So I like that. It's really a personal choice though. Once you get into the artist grade paints, I really don't think there's that much of a difference between brands. Everyone's going to have their own favorites, and a lot of artists will have like a favorite ultramarine blue and a favorite, for one company, and a favorite magenta from another company, and a favorite yellow ochre from another company. So yeah, it would be hard for me to decide. I feel like the Senneliers just feel a little more useful to me, but they're all fine, really. You don't need to have every paint that's out there, and there's not a huge difference. And these are subtle differences that I noticed just because I've been, painting for so long. All right, so I don't think I want to do the same colors on the books that are in the photo. I think I want to do this one kind of in shades of green, like a shade of green, like that olive green, because that is a nice complement to all the pink that I've had. So it's just kind of wetting that area again because it does seem to have dried out quite a bit. And I'm just going to pick up that olive green and see how that looks. And things are going to feather out a little bit because the paper's still damp.
College One Art, do you plan on doing a live class with watercolor pencils?
I haven't. I'm not actually. I don't plan too far ahead, so I did one class with watercolor pencils where we went over a bunch of different ones. I don't have one planned, but I definitely could add it to my list and see what I can come up with. Seems like that I've had a lot of people asking me about watercolor pencils lately, so I should find something to do with them. I think I'm going to darken that up a little bit. That's a little bright. I'm going to add some ultramarine blue to that. Go for more of a darker green here.
Wintella, here we go. Wintella, have you ever tried to mix watercolor paints and coffee and or tea in the same project?
I haven't, because that's going to damage the archival quality of the paint. Coffee is acidic, tea is acidic.
True.
So the chances of my paper going brittle over the years is very high, and if I want to sell that painting, then that the buyer would ultimately be paying the price for that. So I don't. I mean, for your own experimentation on working you're not going to sell, go for it. But I haven't for that reason. That'd be a great project for an art journal or a sketchbook. I probably should have waited on that green a little bit because it is feathering more than I'd like, but we're gonna keep on working through it here.
In Jackson, have any of you used the Schminke Aqua Bronze powder?
I have. It's wonderful. I used it in my craftsy class. It's like almost like metal. It's crazy shiny. I just put a little light washi yellow ochre on the interior of those books. I am going to go in and blot where my green is bleeding though onto the pages. It's like a moldy old book right now. And I think I'll mix. I'm actually going to switch to a smaller brush because I think the size of my brush is hindering me because it's putting up too much water onto the stamp background. To make a darker red, I am going to use the carmine and I'm going to add some burnt sienna to it. And I think I'll pick up a little bit of that dark green mix. I'm going for kind of a burgundy maroon kind of color. And I'm just going to do the spine. My goal in this layer is to get a wash of paint on almost everything. Get that hot mess stage right out of the way.
Steph Gibson, do you always prepare your paper with water before painting? Or do you ever take paints straight to the paper? What are the benefits of wetting the paper beforehand?
It all depends on what I'm painting. Like with a pomegranate one we did a couple weeks ago in layers, I just wet small areas at a time because I needed a lot of precision on that. For this, there's a lot of work to do in this painting, and by wetting it all and getting that unifying wash in first, it's going to keep me from getting too fussy, and it's also going to save a lot of time. I guess it just depends. Like if I've got a scene like this, where it's not like a botanical against a white background, I need something to unify things, and by wetting the entire background first, you end up with a unified piece instead of having it look like it's almost cut out. So everything kind of meshes together a little bit and feels like it all belongs together.
Kendall McCauley, if you like to do lots of glazing layers, are Sennelier the best ones?
If that's a technique you really like, I would say yes. I know it's almost impossible to overwork your piece with Sennelier because of that reason. So my shadow on this cup here, the shadow on the outside of the cup is going to be on the left side. The shadow on the inside of the cup is going to be on the right side. Because if your light is coming in like this, okay, the light is hitting this side of the cup, but on the inside of the cup, it's hitting the opposite inside. So you're going to have a shadow on this part of the inside of the cup, and then on the outside, you're going to have it on the opposite side. Because if you picture the light kind of coming in, it's able to get into the cup on that side, but it's not able to get on that side. I hope that makes sense. And that mix, that gray, is simply that same ultramarine blue and burnt sienna that we made earlier. That's a great mix because you can get anywhere from warmer cool browns all the way to warmer cool grays, pretty close to a black even. And this cup is a white cup, so we're keeping it really light. This is just kind of toning it and giving us that shadow. Now I'm not sure if I got in there. I think I did because I did that whole wash area. I'm just kind of looking to see if it seems a little whiter on the inside of that cup. I think I might try to just tint it a smidgen. Just to make sure. Okay. So now for the flower up here, I'm going to go with my number 8 round. That 4 is a little too small. I'm going to do a really light wash of the carmine or crimson or whatever cool red you're using. Really light, lots of water. I'm going to start in the center and then I'll work my way out. Now the paper I'm using, I actually couldn't, I've had it for a long time, I couldn't find it to link it up online, but it is 100% cotton. It's very similar to Arches, being heavily sized, but it's the old Winsor & Newton Artists watercolor paper, and I've had it for probably about 15 years. And I had found a few torn sheets that I had in my stash, and it's nice. Somebody told me the new Winsor & Newton papers aren't cotton anymore, so so if you are buying it, just make sure you get it's cotton. If it doesn't say, it generally isn't.
Zyriac RM Draws. Have you ever made a painting that you thought was so good that you didn't sell it?
Nope. It's all for sale. I mean, I have some that I've kept, mostly though because they're too large really that I wouldn't want to ship it. I am very unsentimental about my artwork. I remember though when I was first starting out and I got accepted into a gallery show, and the painting, actually looking back at it, the painting wasn't that great, but I was so proud of it and I really loved it. And so I priced it way too high because I didn't really want it to sell. And it didn't, so it's like, oh my gosh, people are going to be falling over themselves to buy this beautiful masterpiece. And we'll also do the same thing to the smaller one, working from the inside out, so that as you get to the outside edge, your brush is fairly dry and it should eliminate too much bleeding. I just don't like the look when you've got a flower and it looks like it's almost cut out, like a collage. Nothing wrong with collages, but when I'm doing watercolor, I don't want it to look like a collage. And I just like that you get a little bit of a softness. Okay, so we haven't done the bottle yet, because the bottle is something that I want to be fairly crisp, because glass does not have soft, fuzzy edges. Neither does ceramic, but this is a white ceramic mug, so any colors that get in there, it would be reflected off of there pretty accurately. So I didn't mind if some bled into that. So with this, I'm going to work on the glass up here, but the background's dry enough that I can do that. So I am going to use my same gray mix. It's ultramarine blue and burnt sienna mixed fairly equally, so I have a slightly cool gray. So maybe a smidgen heavier on the ultramarine, and I am just going to add, I'm not really going to paint it in because we have color in the glass from what's behind it. I'm just going to put in a few, just like refraction marks. And I can also go in and get some of this inside of the copper area of the vase. I'm going around the stem now. I want to make sure that I can retain that. Okay, and then I'm going to take some yellow ochre. I'm going to keep this part. I'm not adding any more water to that, and it's fairly dry by now. I'm going to take some yellow ochre, and I'm going to add that in here like that. I'm going to grab, well, maybe put a little bit more over here, a little over here too. Because when you're doing metallics, you're going to have all sorts of colors in there. So let me show you the photo for a sec. We've got red there. Okay, that's reflecting from that. So I've got to keep in mind that I've got a book there that's black, and on my picture it's green. So I wouldn't want to put a black reflection in there because that's not the color of my book. So you got to keep that when you're changing a reference photo. You want to make sure that you stay true to the changes that you've made and that they agree with the choices of colors you're using. So I'm going to put a little bit of Let me thin that down a little bit. So I'm adding water to it, but I don't want a soppy wet brush, so I'm going to blot my brush off. That'll keep the same value of the color, but it'll remove the excess water. And now I'm going to grab some burnt sienna. If you don't have burnt sienna, you could use English red or Indian red. Those are very earthy, brownish reds. And I'm just going to throw some here and there. Remember, this is our first layer. Nothing to get too worried about here.
We have Steve from the Mind of Watercolor joining us.
Oh, hey, Steve. Thanks for stopping by.
Denise in Liquid Colors here
Awesome.
as well.
Hey, guys.
We got some bigwigs showing up.
We got some
today.
heavy hitters in the chat. That's awesome. Thanks for coming by, guys.
Wintertime, so we can't do anything outside.
Seriously. Denise is in California, though, so she's probably doing she has plenty to do outside, I'm sure.
Maybe.
Not like us poor.
I guess what part of California?
That's
though?
true. That's true.
Because if it's the northern part, it could be more like this weather.
Oh yeah, and they've had having some terrible mudslides and stuff.
I know. I was watching.
Oh my
the news
gosh,
last
that was
night. This
awful.
guy got video footage outside his house. You could just see it coming down. Terrifying.
Oh my gosh, it's so scary.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean we get cold winters, but there's so much we don't have to worry about.
Yeah, I'd rather get a foot of snow than to be standing in my driveway and just watching this giant mudslide that's just wiping everything in its path out.
So sad.
And there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Right.
At least with snow, you can shovel and snow blow, and it looks pretty after.
Yeah.
Mudslide, it's...
Yeah, the snow doesn't come down fast enough to, like, crush you.
Right.
Or sweep you away or anything. Okay, so I'm going to dry this now that we've got pretty much a layer of color on everything. And then we can work on our next layer. So if you have any questions while I am drying, it's a great time to ask them. I also like when I do a wet into wet background, I like these little happy accidents I get. Like I've got this background over here from where I had a puddle and didn't notice it. I've got also a big bloom over there. I kind of enjoy that sort of texture in my background layer. For one thing, it takes away the pressure of making something perfect. I think when you have that hot mess stage down, you don't worry because you're like, well, there's nothing I'm going to do that's going to make it look any worse. So I might as well plug ahead without having any fear of messing up. So that's another good reason to try doing a loose wash to begin your painting with.
Lucille Renz, what is the name of the children's book you illustrated recently?
Lucille, the name of the new children's book I illustrated is Sea Glass and the Lighthouse. It's available on Amazon.com. I believe the author is going to have some signed copies available on her website, kellybrooksbay.com. But you can get a copy on Amazon any day of the week. Cotton paper takes a little longer to dry than cellulose paper just because it absorbs more water. It's kind of like a cotton rag versus a paper towel. It just holds more. Alright, that feels pretty dry. I think we're good. So I actually want to use a flat brush. So because this is really too big to fit in my pans, what I'm going to do is get the color out with a round brush onto my palette and then pick it up with a flat brush. So I'm grabbing some ultramarine and I'm putting it in that puddle where I had mixed my gray with the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna because I want it to be brighter but not like straight out of the tube bright. I'll wet the brush so my paint will flow and I'm going to soak up as much of that paint as I can. And then what I'm going to do is I want to glossy up that window in the background. So I'm going to go in here to define the edge of that table. And then just kind of dance on some oh, almost stuck my brush in my water cup there, but I didn't.
Ian Jackson, colors for metallic part of painting, what are the best colors to use?
Well, you've got to use the colors that represent the metal, but you also have to use colors that represent what's around the metal, so every color you've already used. I'm using the local color, the coppery will be the burnt sienna and yellow ochre, but then it's going to reflect the other colors that surround it. So with metallics, you've got that reflection, that almost mirroring that you need to account for. You have to look at every situation uniquely. Okay, that's all I'm going to do to that. I'm going to move over to our fabric here, and again, I am going to grab some color on the palette on its own. And I'm going to grab that carmine.
The Impatient Painter, how would you recommend creating a watercolor painting with a ripped edge? I'm assuming she means like the torn edges of the paper.
Well, a lot of times I buy my paper in big sheets and I just tear it down. I fold it to the size I want and then I tear it with a metal edged ruler, and that's how I do that. So I've got a clean, wet brush, and I've just blotted it a little bit to take out the extra paint, and then I'm going to just set the edge of it into this carmine, okay? And I think you can probably see that where that paint is, maybe it's just on one edge. And then I can do the fabric by kind of dragging up the brush, and the color will fade out. That's how you can get a really nice wrinkle in the fabric. And if this is too dark, don't worry, after it dries you can glaze over it with a lighter wash of the carmine. That will help blend everything together. Now you can do the same thing to get a softer color in the center, and what I would do for that is, again, clean off my brush, blot it, take that other brush that I had picked the color up with, and grab some color on that. Then I can just kind of go in and do a streak of that color, and then I can go over it with my damp brush so that it spreads over the entire streak, and I can work it back and forth until the edges fade. Or you could work each edge at a time if you wanted to.
Lisa Evans, have you ever used Blick Art watercolors?
I only have one tube of their paints. They're fine. I only got the Indanthrone Blue because I'd never tried that color before, and I never tried Blick watercolors before, so I just used that. I'm here softening those a little bit because they did seem a little bit dark.
Annette Fournier, what good general use blue could I get, since Prussian blue doesn't lift? So what's a good general use blue? Like, what can you...
Well, Prussian blue is a cool blue. A lot of cool blues stain. Like phthalo blue is much stainier than Prussian. Indanthrone is a cool dark blue that lifts all right. I don't think Prussian has that much of a problem with lifting, but phthalo definitely does. Your cool colors do tend to be more transparent, and that makes them inevitably a little bit more staining. So it depends. If you don't want a very strong color, you could use, and you want a cool blue, like cobalt teal is cool. It's almost turquoisey. Cerulean. Although sometimes you buy a cerulean and it will have a phthalo base, and then it's really staining. It depends on, like, Mission Gold cerulean is really almost like a phthalo. I'm adding some yellow ochre in here.
Christine D, what do you use to draw in your designs so that it will almost disappear? I can't erase my drawing and it looks awful.
I just used a mechanical pencil, a Bic mechanical pencil. don't dry, well, I dry dark enough that you guys can see it. So you know what, I think like, because I use a fairly soft lead, I think a lot of it kind of smudges out while I'm painting. The Blick pencils do smudge, so I think that's part of like what's happening with my sketches. I really like using that flat brush, so I am going to again grab out some colors with my round and then use the flat to apply them. I'm using burnt sienna and ultramarine.
Jill Maskianika, can you use glycerin and gouache to prevent cracking in pans?
Yes, you can. I want this edge of the table to be dark. And I find with a flat brush, it's really easy to get a straight edge. If you struggle with that, or if you're just trying to draw something that's a little more angular than softer and rounder. And this brush, you can get any of these brushes on their own or in the value set of Mimic brushes. Okay, now I'm going to grab a little more burnt sienna and add that to that mix so it's a little bit lighter. And I'm going to pull out the color right next to the cutting board, and I can leave a little gap where it comes to the edge of the table so I don't get it backwashing, and also so I end up with a little highlight there. And I didn't go right up there to this area because I don't want it to blend into the curtains, because now I want crisper details. The same thing over here. Now, we obviously do have some light coming in from this way, and I'm assuming that if we have a window back here, that even if the sun isn't right back there, you're still going to have some light from the window coming in. So because of that, I'm going to let this lighten up as we get closer to that window, and I'm going to add a little yellow ochre into my burnt sienna blue mix to get that to be a little bit brighter. Use that same brush to mix with the yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and I'll load up this brush because then I can get that nice chisel edge. It's so much easier to do a straight line with a flat brush. And since we're using the same colors throughout, our painting is going to have harmony. And if you do get some brush strokes, don't worry about it because it's a tabletop. It would have wood grain. It'd have like wood grain lines and stuff, so we'll work that in later. It's your painting. It can be however you want it to be. And then I'll want to use this same color over here. Oh, it does appear to be dry enough, so I'm going to go right in and do that. Except I can have that a little bit darker just because the curtain's in the way. Curtain is blocking it. So it's those things you want to think about when you're painting so that your painting makes sense. So you're using a reference photo, but you're changing things like lighting sources or colors of surrounding objects. You just got to make sure that you account for that when you are when you're adding colors to other objects, because they all need to agree. It's kind of like grammar. There we go. Okay, I want to work on the flower a little bit because that's going to take a few layers, so I know there's going to be some waiting time, drying time, so let's go in with, I don't think I want to go with a number 4. That's a little small for this stage of the game. Let's go with the number 8. And let's grab some carmine, and I'm going to turn my palette around because I've kind of used up all my mixing area there. Grab some carmine, some water. So it's about the consistency of, maybe skim milk. And I am going to add in, I'm going to be leaving the highlights. I'm going to be painting in, I can paint anywhere it's mid-tone or shadow. Just leave those highlights alone because we've already painted the highlights. We're layering that middle tone and shadow. So, hey, if you're a rubber stamper and you ever use those layering stamps, like the first thing we stamped would be like that base layer, the big stamp. Where we're painting right now, this would be like the middle stamp that you're painting. And I realize it's probably only is like 10% of the people listening are probably going to get that because they're stampers too. But you're basically painting everything that's not the lightest highlight.
Lisa Evans, if you could only choose 3 brush sizes to use, what would they be and what brand would you pick?
For watercolor, I would choose a 1/2" angular Royal & Langnickel Aqualon, a number 30 Mimic Creative Mark, and a number 10 Mimic Creative Mark, these here. That's tough because I don't use that many brushes, but like if I had to pick, definitely, because those are just probably the most versatile. But I mean, if you asked another artist, they'd probably say something different because they might have techniques that they prefer to use different brushes. But I don't fuss around with too much detail, so I wouldn't choose a tiny brush.
Also, you need to keep scaring people with the giant brushes that you use.
That's true. I am a YouTuber. I like to shock and awe after all.
That's right. And if you can't shock and awe with the size of your brush, what can you shock and awe with?
I know. Nothing I want to put on YouTube, I'll tell you that much. I'm going to do the same thing to this little flower. Again, we're just painting this middle value anywhere we have middle value petals or shadows. We're just not painting the highlights, basically. We're building up layers. So the reason I like a brush like this, even though it's big, it comes to a nice point. So I can go up on the tip of my brush and I can get little details, but I can go on the side of the brush and I can put a lot of color down. And if you just have a tiny brush, that's all you have is a tiny brush. If you have a larger brush that comes to a fine point, then you've got almost every size of brush between what the tip of the point is all the way to the belly of the brush. So you have like all those sizes in there basically. Okay, now I'm going to do the stem and leaves of our peony up here. And I'm going to grab the olive green. I'm going to paint it in first with the olive green. And I'm going to see how I kind of let it kind of skip there because I'm going to have some highlight. There'll be highlights on the vase and I'm just kind of leaving some brighter areas where it would be highlights so I don't have to go in later and go in with colored pencil or bleed proof white or anything. So I'm just basically leaving those highlights unpainted. And you could have also done that with masking fluid. I'm not a huge fan of masking fluid. There are times when it's definitely really useful, but it's not something I like to use all that much. It just seems to take me out of the flow of creating. And while I've got this on my brush, I feel like I want to kind of dig in and start shaping that up. I just grabbing that color I already mixed for that, which was ultramarine blue, and the olive green. And I know it's pretty rough and sketchy looking at this stage, but don't worry, we'll sharpen it up. This book's been read in the tub. It's got some wrinkled pages.
It happens.
The scary part, person dropped it.
They dump their watercolor paint water all over it.
Yep. That's why I listen to audiobooks when I paint. How many people do we have watching today?
We have 340.
Wonderful. And again, the back side of the book, you don't want that too dark. You can actually even pick up a little bit of yellow ochre and mix it in there because that's where the light would be coming in from the window. We also know we have some light coming in from this side.
Supritha B, some colors like carmine and cadmium look similar to me, and the same with blues like French ultramarine and ultramarine. Are you very particular while choosing similar looking colors like this?
Well, French ultramarine and ultramarine can be substituted. They're very identical, just about. French ultramarine might have just a smidgen more red undertone to it than regular ultramarine, but it's really not going to be an issue when you're mixing colors. Cadmium and carmine. Cadmium is a very orange red, and carmine is a very pink red. So those two are pretty. You specifically don't want to mix those up too much. But if they look too close to you, take a look at this. I just want to show you what crimson and carmine look like in the pan. So there's carmine in the pan right there. This is crimson. Now let me swatch out that crimson next to the carmine on my little swatch here. They're not that different, but they look a lot different in the palette. So that might be helpful for you if you've got carmine. Maybe you should grab some crimson. There's your crimson there. See, very similar, and that will be good for all of your mixes where you need a cool red. It's actually a little bit more transparent too, so that would be a benefit. So that's probably what I would do if you're having a hard time. I think because carmine does tend to be a little bit more opaque, especially in the pan when you have that much of it, that's how it gets confused with cadmium, because cadmium is a very opaque red. So that would be my hint for you. Maybe take out the carmine, put in crimson, and then you can put the carmine back in once you're used to your crimson being in that spot and you know that there's a cool color there. I think that would probably help you with any confusion there with those colors, because I think that's what it is, just because those colors stand out so much because they tend to be a little bit more opaque. I hope that makes sense. I think once you painted out swatches of them, though, you would be like, whoa, those colors are really different. But it only takes one time of dipping that brush in there and getting the wrong one on your painting to kind of frustrate you. I think Chewy's nervous because we've had snow coming off the roof with all this rain that we're getting. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow around this flower area because it would cast a little bit. And I just sharpened up this bottom cover here. I'm going to work on the cutting board because the green book is wet, so I want to let that dry a bit before I work on the red book. But I mean, just look at how much just another layer adds definition to your piece. I'm going to blend that out a little bit more. And that's with the Sennelier paints, I feel like you get that glow a little bit better every time you add a layer. With some brands of paints, you might be able to do 2 or 3 layers, and then it really kind of looks real flat. I think because of the amount of honey and gum arabic they use in their paints, it just kind of makes each layer a little more luminous with the Senneliers. Again, a small thing. If you're not layering, probably not even worth trying them if you have no desire to layer. But just I thought I'd mention it because it is an interesting quality, and I think it's a really lovely one of that paint. I didn't like the paint when I first got it. I was like, oh, this is kind of lackluster, and just in one layer it's pretty lackluster, but once you get those additional layers on, it's really gorgeous. I'm gonna put a little bit of ultramarine blue into that burnt sienna. I don't want it as dark as the tabletop or as cool as the tabletop, but I do need a bit of a shadow here next to my objects, otherwise they're not going to have the weight that I want them to have. Now the light's coming in here. I'm still going to have a little sliver of dark there. and have more dark on this side. And these colors are sedimentary. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna are colors that the pigments, they're kind of more on the opaque side. Their pigments are larger and they don't settle down into the fibers of the paper. They stay on top of the paper. So what that means is I can go in and I can lift it later if I decide I want to remove some of that from my painting.
And Margaret McElroy, what hand-arm position are you most comfortable when painting?
I tend to stand a lot when I work. I'm standing right now, so I have a very loose grip on the brush. It's just pretty much setting in there. It's not even really gripped. And I try to move from my shoulder. But that's for watercolor. For if I was just doing painting oils for my own pleasure and not recording a tutorial, I would stand at an easel. That would be much more comfortable for me. Mostly for the glare, because with the oils you get so much glare from just the shininess and oiliness of the paint.
Baru Siva, is there any difference in lifting properties of Fabriano Artistico paper in comparison to Arches?
I have an awful hard time lifting on Fabriano. I don't know if other people have that issue, but I have some of their, I have their soft press, soft press, rough, and cold press. And granted, I have the older stock of that. I don't have any that's really recent except for a block that I got from Jerry's last year that I've used up, which does seem to lift a little better now. But I have had a much more harder time of lifting from them, and I think it's because they don't use gelatin as their sizing. They use a synthetic sizing, and I don't think it lifts quite as well. And I also think the colors don't look as bright on it as they do on like an Arches. I'm just doing this really light layer, and I'm bringing it up to my shadows, just kind of smoothing it in. And I think I will maybe grab a little bit of ultramarine, not ultramarine, I'm sorry, yellow ochre here for this brighter edge that's near the light source. And I will leave a little sliver of the lighter color on the edge of something that's going to be more in the highlight area. And since it's not shockingly bright white, which would be fine on the glass, but we want that on the cutting board, since it's not shockingly bright white, it does seem to match and go a little bit better. And this edge here, the edge is actually brighter than the face of the cutting board because of the way the light's coming in. I'm just using dragging over that yellow ochre or burnt sienna mix. It's really watery. And then I'll have a darker shade here, and I'm going to pull that towards it that way, so where they meet in the middle, they'll just kind of fade and blend together. Because I'm working quick enough that they're staying wet, and my paper is sized heavily enough that it's not automatically sinking in. There was a painting I did on the Fabriano. I think it was the one of those, like a tropical drink, and I was having some issues with that because of colors that I expected to lift, because they usually did on other papers I used were not lifting on that, and it was giving me quite a bit of grief. So I'm pretty sure that was the one. If you want to look back at that, I seem to recall having some struggles with it, and I had to go in with colored pencil because I had lost all my ability to lift. All right, so now we're going to do some copper here on the rim of this cup. I think everything is dry next to that area, so we're good to do that. I'm going to start with some yellow ochre. Again, raw sienna or Naples yellow deep if you don't have yellow ochre. And I'm going to paint in the brighter spot. So I'll show you the reference photo in case you don't have it pulled up on your computer. If you look here, we've got bright here, bright here, bright here. This is almost white, actually. So I'm just kind of, instead of saying I'm painting something copper, which, your brain would say, well, you painted all that copper color, you want to actually paint how the light is bouncing off of it. And it's going to look patchy and weird until you're done. The nice thing about yellow ochre for this instance is that yellow ochre is a fairly opaque color. Even though it's a transparent watercolor, quote unquote, its properties are more opaque. It's, because it's not a staining color. It doesn't seep down to the fibers. It stays on top of the fibers.
Is it true that Mgram watercolors won't dry in pans in hot, humid climates? I have avoided them since I heard this.
Well, I will tell you that I've had issues with them in the summer. Not like you just have to keep your palette upright or just put a little bit in because, yeah, it's got honey in it. It's got more honey in it than the Senneliers, and that does keep it absorbs moisture from the air. When I took these on vacation with me, they were really sticky. I was surprised at how sticky they were because I never had that issue up here in Maine, but down in Bahamas, everything got really sticky. I still have sand in my palette because stuff just stuck to it. So depending on where you live, if you live in some place that's hot and dry, don't worry about it. If you live in, some place that's really humid,
Florida,
yeah, you want to,
Virginia.
yeah. Arizona, you're fine.
Ian Jackson, how do you feel about gelatin in watercolor paper, and are there options for sized paper without gelatin?
I look at it this way. I am a vegetarian. I don't eat animals or animal byproducts, but I would honestly, if they're going to kill an animal, I'd rather see the whole animal be used. And, the rest of my family, I only have one other vegetarian in my family. They're eating meat, the animal's getting eaten. I'd like to see the rest of it used as well. From a professional standpoint, I prefer paper that has gelatin in it. I think it performs better, and it's a tried and true material. The animals aren't killed for their gelatin. They're not killed for their bones. They're killed for the meat, and that's a byproduct. So that's my personal opinion that I'd like to see the whole animal used. And I do think it's a better product than the synthetic gelatin. Fabriano does synthetic sizing on theirs, and I personally have a hard time lifting on it sometimes. But that's you do what's best for you, and luckily there are options out there. So to get that brushed copper look while it's still wet, I'm actually going to grab this fan brush and see if I can't really move it too much, but maybe I'll pick up some of this with my fan brush. Had a big discussion on brushes the other day, and because I did recently find some synthetic hog brushes. They finally come out with synthetic hog brushes. It's a Mimic line actually, because before then, if you try to use synthetics with your oils, you don't get too many paintings out of them before you have to throw them away, and I feel like that's worse for the environment than using a hog brush that's going to last me 2 decades, because most of my brushes are a couple decades old. And I had somebody leave a nasty comment on my channel about that, and
I'm sorry, I should really?
And I'm like, the amount of animals that I've saved by not eating them, I feel like it cancels out the few hog brushes that I have that I've had for decades because they last, and I'm not putting stuff in the landfills. So I just try to do
need hobbies other than trolling.
I just try to do the least amount of harm. It's
right.
I'm not going to go throw away all my brushes that I've been using for 20 years because, what good is that going to do? So I can buy cheap synthetic ones that I'll have to throw away?
They're probably made by people in China who get paid 4 cents a day and a bowl of rice, and some of those are children. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you got to cut big picture. Okay. Brianna later. I just signed a lease on my first antique mall booth. I'm selling cards and wanted to know, what did you price your watercolor cards at?
Oh, how neat is she now? I wonder if she's at the place that I was at the Brewer one.
She didn't say which one.
Oh, I priced my cards anywhere between $2 and $7. My hand-painted watercolor cards I sold for $7, and the crafted ones, depending on how much detail, between $2 and $5 mostly.
The Mind of Watercolor. What is your favorite brand of gouache?
Oh, Steve, I haven't used many gouaches. Out of what I have used, I have to say, I have used the M. Grimm gouache, and that's really nice. But I really like the cheap Lucas Studio gouache. It's so cheap, and it works so well.
Budget friendly.
But
budget friendly.
Most gouaches aren't light fast, so I figure, well, why am I going to spend $15 a tube for non-light fast Winsor & Newton gouache when I can get a set of 6 for $12 from for these Lucas ones that seem to work just fine. I was only using them in an art journal and not on things to sell, so But you're taking that from somebody who hasn't used a lot of gouache, so I really can't give you a comprehensive answer there.
And Brianna is in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, oh, that'd be cool. Do you have someone take my spot? Because I just closed mine up. All right, now I'm going to grab some of the pink color. So that technique I was just doing, I was just brushing back and forth with the tip of my brush, and then I'd go in sometimes with a little bit of fan brush and streak that across too, because I want to get that texture that's very unique to copper, that kind of brushed metal look. And so I don't want to go with this pink perfectly bright like that. It was okay to do on our wash because it was pretty watered down. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to that, so I have the local color of the metal, and then I'm adding the reflected color of the flower. So we end up with something that's a little bit more true to what's there. We've taken into account both of those. And I'm putting on little choppy horizontal strokes. And then I'm going to just kind of flick it out with a fan brush. And I'm just going to look and see if there's any place else I want to use that color while I'm at it. I think maybe a little bit up here. Okay, and the inside of the vase is pretty dark, so we're going to go ahead and take our ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, mix it with very little water. And then, so this is almost black. It's almost like between like it almost looks like a Payne's gray right here. Grab a little bit more of your burnt sienna and put it on over to the edge, so you have a couple choices of color. And wipe that off a little bit more and get another one that's a little bit lighter. Because things are usually not all one color. Even if something's one color, you have all the different, you have the lights interacting on it and the other objects interacting on it. So we are going to start off with the dark color here. And I'm actually going to turn my painting because I want to make sure that I can paint against that edge and keep that nice and crisp. I'm going to go in this with this dark color first. I'm going to pick up some medium color in here. And notice I'm not following the contour because I've got a refraction happening here, a light refraction. So I am leaving this part undone, this part right next to the edge undone, because there's a light refraction in there. I'm going to go in front of that stem actually, because we have some refracted shadow in there. And we got some color even being brought up the edge of the vase. I'm going to grab the medium color. And I'm going to clean my brush and grab the brighter color. And look at it right side up and see what I got there. And I'm going to add a little of this on the edge. Because any of these colors are now fair game, and you can distort things because glass gets distorted.
Starshine Soldier, why are most gouaches not light fast? Do they not use the same pigments as watercolors?
They use a lot of the same pigments, but the fillers that they have to put in there, or the opacifiers they have to put in there, stretch. If you think of like your pigment particles being in a nice, solid, nice, tight clump together, like in watercolor, this is almost all like pure pigments, okay? There's pigment and there's gum arabic. So there's the pigment and there's the glue, pretty much. And there's something in there like some honey or glycerin to keep it moist. When you have gouache, they have to put an opacifier in there. So by adding that opacifier in there, it spreads apart all those little individual pigments of color. And as they get stretched thin and thin and thinner, they get weaker and weaker and weaker, and they can't withstand as much light damage because they just are a very thin coating. If you think about putting some sunscreen on, and they tell you should put like a big gob of sunscreen on, like the size of a golf ball to cover your body. Well, if you only put the size of a pea to cover your body, you're not going to have as much sun protection, and you're not going to be able to stay out in the sun quite as long. That's the same thing with your pigments and your paints. You just, when you spread that paint out really thin, when you spread those pigment particles across, they lose their strength to defend themselves against the elements. And that's why watercolor is so much more vulnerable, is it doesn't have a strong binder like oil paints does, or acrylics. Each of those pigment particles isn't coated in an oil or an acrylic emulsion that can protect it. It's kind of, out there on its own.
Brenda Collins Deeks, can you reconstitute gouache if it dries out the same way you can with watercolor? If so, what do you use to do it?
You can. You just add some water to it. It does want to crack in the pan a little bit more. It's not as, it doesn't have as much humectant in it as a watercolor will. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind. All right, and I need a little more shadow towards the bottom of this. So I'm going to go into that darker mix that I made. And I am going to, in the same fashion that I was applying the color to the vase, I'm going to apply the shadow. And it's burnt sienna and ultramarine, just with a little bit more ultramarine in it to darken it up more. And this can help us get that nice crisp bottom if it got a little blurry in our wash stage. And you're going to be overlapping that shadow on top of your darker copper color. Notice the strokes, I'm just doing little horizontal strokes. Now I see a bead of water on my paper, so I want to blot that up before it lifts anything up or causes me trouble down the road. That's a nice thing about being able to tip your paper, is you're going to catch those problems like that a lot sooner. You could also use a liner for this. And grab a little more burnt sienna on its own. Fairly watery, and add that in here and there too. And some more yellow ochre.
Brenda Collins Deeks, uh-oh, I added gum arabic. Have I ruined the gouache now?
No, that's just the binder. That's just glue. When you think of that, it might make it a little glossier, but it won't really hurt anything. It might make it a little more transparent because gum arabic is a clear binder. Okay, now we're going to go out. Let's do this book here. That's looking very naked there. Let's mix some of our carmine and burnt sienna. So we get a burgundy-ish color. We can add a little smidgen of our ultramarine blue to that. That's a little much. And we'll get the covers done. Now if you want to change the color of your book, if you don't want to have a burgundy book, you go ahead and do whatever color you want to do. You really get a nice variety of colors, even though we've only used 5. And I'm going to do the top of the book a little bit darker than the side because of where the light's coming in. I will put a little bit of that dark color over here by the flower, where it would have a little bit more shadow. And right where it touches the table. And then I'm going to clean my brush and grab a little watered down color and just bring it in. Leave that little sliver between the top and the spine of the book for a highlight. Now after the cover's dry, I can use my Maxine's mop and try to lift out some of that pigment if I want to, but I'm just going to leave it be for now. For the shadows on our flowers, we are going to go very similar. Actually, we could probably use that color. I just am a little concerned about having the burnt sienna in there because that might make it a little bit dead of a color because it is kind of earthy. So I think I will just over here on the edge, I'm going to take the carmine and a little bit of the ultramarine blue. If I feel like I want to dip into that later, I can, but I think I would rather stay out of the burnt sienna for now. But I'm not ready to wash it off my palette. I still might use it. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top flower here. And actually, I think I might switch to my liner brush only because this brush does not have a great point to it. Oh, I could go with this one. Let's do this. This is a number 2 round. And I'll go in and put these nice, crisp, deep shadows. So generally, I will go on the petal that is behind a highlighted area. And I like to go and paint a few of the shadows, and then I'll go in with a wet brush and just kind of soften them a little bit. Just damp brush, not really wet, but just a little bit damp. Okay, so now I'll clean my brush, just blot it, and then make sure there's no beads on the ferrule. We don't want those beads of water slipping down and causing havoc. And I'll spread some of that out. And then that has a lot more dimension than the rest of it, just because it's got a little bit more shadow in it. So we do still want to see those highlights, and we still want to see some of that mid-tone. But this is going to give us a couple other layers of depth because of the fading out that we do here with the water. You don't have to fade everything out. If you have a bunch of really tightly packed petals and you don't have room to fade it, then you don't have to. I just want to enhance the contrast between the highlights and the rest of the petal. And I would urge you only to go, like if you're doing a big painting of this, I would just warn you to only, if you're going to start detailing, if you're a really big piece, only do the amount of detailing that you think you can sustain throughout the painting, because you don't want to get bored with it and then realize you have a whole lot of painting to go. And you can actually keep another brush in your hand if you want to, and just it's called the English 2-brush technique. You can keep one brush in your hand that's just damp with water, and keep the other brush that has the paint on it, and you can keep switching between those 2 brushes. Like you add a bit of color and then you switch to the other brush. I've never gotten really adept at doing that. I always found this is a little bit easier, but I'm sure if you get used to it, then it's just as easy as this. Maybe easier. You can also add more detail this way too. If you've missed some detail, you can put some little suggestions of other petals. And if this is too distinct, don't worry, because we can go over with another layer that just kind of softens and kind of makes everything feel a little bit more integrated. We're going to do the same thing down to this petal, down to this flower. I like to wait a bit though before I do anything like that, because sometimes we can psych ourselves out. Like sometimes we're correcting a problem that's not even there. So I like to skip around to another part of the picture before I decide whether I need to do a kind of a unifying layer at the end. With the tight petals here in the center, I'm not even going to bother blending. I'm going to keep them nice and crisp. And I'll just blend the outer ones. I felt like I needed a little bit more red in this. It was a little too purple, so I'm doing that right now. And just spreading out the color on those exterior petals. All right, we'll let that sit for a bit. That's going to need to be softened a little bit, but I'm just going to let that be because I know what I'm going to do to that one. I'm just going to put like a kind of a glaze of carmine over almost the entire thing and then scrunch a paper towel down and lift it. But that needs to dry first. So now I need some deep shadows on the coppery rim there. And for that, I am going to use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. You should have it so it's almost black. And you off your brush. You don't want it like juicy. Now, if you were going to use masking fluid, that might be a nice area to do the masking fluid where you have that really crisp highlights. Although I'll tell you right now, it'll be easier to do with a gel pen. But somebody always asks about masking fluid, so I thought I would offer that up. I'm not putting my stuff in any competitions that require only transparent watercolor. In fact, the reason I don't put my stuff in competitions is because I find it to be very... I don't know. It really irritates me that that these art competitions you have to pay to enter, and it just seems like a scam to me.
Well, and the thing too is art is so subjective.
Yeah.
For like someone could just automatically be turned off by your piece of art because they're not into landscapes or
right.
animals or whatever.
Right.
I mean, you can kind of base to a point on skill level, but I don't know. Like what I find appealing, like an appealing piece of art, is not going to be necessarily the same thing that you find, and vice versa. They're weird. I don't know.
Right. I just feel like it takes advantage of a lot of artists. Not that I'm trying to dissuade anybody from entering competition, but I don't know. Paying to enter a contest just rubs me the wrong way.
And you're also just not a very competitive person. Like, that's just kind of not your personality.
Yeah, that's true. Unless it comes to board games, which is why I don't play board games very often.
Then it's a whole... I'm very competitive when it comes to games, too.
You and I should be on the same... you good at Pictionary? I've been looking for a good Pictionary partner.
It's been a while since I played it, but
Or Taboo. Taboo's another good one.
Yeah, there have been friends that have looked at me differently after a game.
I made the kids so mad they were stomping their feet. It was so funny. I don't play board games very much, so we got the kids got the Taboo out, and Jason and I played against the kids, and Maisie was stomping her feet and having a fit.
There's no letting people win in games. If you can't win, that's your own problem. Don't play a game.
Yeah, hey, at least you didn't have to pay to play the game.
Bryn effective framing supplies for watercolor?
I go pretty simply. I like gallery style frames, and Jerry's Artorama and Dick Blick, and also Cheap Joe's they have these basic. They're a wooden frame. They're small. The face is small, but they're deep. They go about 2 inches away from the wall. They're very chic, I think, and they're very inexpensive. And that is what I tend to use. I think the Jerry's ones are called Ambience, and I think the Blick ones are called like Blick Gallery. I wouldn't be surprised if they were all made at the same place. But that's what I use, and I just cut my own mats. I just get white or black, usually matte board. Usually white is what I use the most, but I do occasionally matte with color. And yeah, I just ordered online. I usually keep sheets of colors I use a lot on hand for mats. I don't keep frames on hand anymore because I find they can just get damaged way too easily.
And they take up a lot.
They do. Oh my gosh, they take up so much space. You wouldn't think it, but frames take, unless they're hanging on the wall, frames take up too much space to keep around.
Cheryl Collier, your knowledge of all things art awes me. Did you major in art in college? Were you born knowing all this?
I didn't. I went to broadcasting school and was a radio announcer as my profession. But I just learned by reading magazines, reading books. There's lots of information online. But honestly, books I think are probably the best solution. There's the Artist Handbook is one that's really good. And there used to be a lot more magazines out for art stuff that you could find out information on. Not so much anymore. I just actually subscribed to the Artist magazine. Not that one. The Watercolor Painter or something. I think it's by the same people as the Artist magazine, but I haven't got an issue yet. I'm hoping that's a good one. But you just pick it up if you're interested in it. There's no reason anybody can't learn as much as I have.
Especially now with YouTube, because
holy moly,
in your
yeah.
day, there was
no YouTube.
There was no internet.
No.
You had to go to the library or take a class with a person.
Yeah, they started really young, and I trained with a really talented watercolorist from age 5 on up until 13. Okay, so now I'm going to do that unifying wash on the flowers because I feel like they're just kind of dull. And I'm just going to use the Carmine on its own. In fact, I am actually going to clean up a little spot on my palette because I really want to make sure this is pure. And I'm not doing too many layers. Carmine is one of those colors where it does have a little more opacity to it. If you were using magenta, you could layer a little bit more. I thought about using magenta, but it was just going way too purple for me whenever I did any mixes, so I decided the Carmine had a warmer undertone than I wanted. Even though it's a cool color, it still has a warmer undertone. So my brush is sopping wet. I've got, I'd say, medium color load on it. Skim milk here on my palette. And what I'm going to do is a controlled wash. In a controlled wash, we tip our paper and we're going over the entire thing. We are going to lay down a really juicy bead of color. And we're going to add more paint to that bead. We're going to drag it down. When we start to run out of paint, we are going to add another brush load. The reason we're doing this is we want the entire thing to stay wet while we're going. We don't want to have any back runs. And we're working pretty quickly because I want to be able to scrunch a paper towel and blot off some texture and highlights. I'm just picking up enough paint to just finish up this flower. I don't need to add to the bead because we're right about to the end. If you have leftover paint that's kind of beading up on the bottom of your flower, then you want to wipe your brush off and then set it in the bead and soak it up. So now you need a clean, dry paper towel. You're going to crunch that up good so you have lots of texture on the towel. Blot it a couple times, leave it the heck alone.
Walk away.
Yep.
Walk away.
And paper towel saving tip, I actually, whenever I wash an apple, I save the paper towels for watercolor. I don't throw them away. I just, you rinse off an apple, you wipe it with a paper towel. I save those paper towels for art. We're going to do the same thing to this flower here. I don't want to wash a cloth towel every time I wipe an apple. Because I know someone's going to leave me a comment.
About what?
About, why don't you use a cloth towel to wipe your apples with? Because I don't want to wash a cloth towel every time I wipe an apple, which is like several times a day. I might wipe...
Paper towels are just more sanitary sometimes. Blast it all, and that's just how it is.
Yeah.
I keep a tub of those sanitizing wipes, Clorox wipes on my counter, and I don't feel bad because I have a big counter and cook a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not hauling out a towel and spray every time I need to sanitize.
Mm-hmm.
I use the sanitary wipes and then I put them in the trash can.
Yep. Yeah, I do keep those in the bathroom, the sanitary counter wipes, the Clorox wipes.
It's just so, I use towels for a lot, but man, there's just sometimes these towels are not sanitary.
Get the chicken juice or the...
Oh, seriously, just life. Hands, cold season.
Yeah.
Cold season.
You seriously.
Ugh.
So that was...
If they have problems with it, you can direct them to me. I'm not on YouTube, but they can try and find me on Facebook, and I'll chat with them.
So this is ultramarine blue and the olive green, just for the shadows on the on our little leaves here. And I'm also going to put just a little bit of it on the vase. And I'm going to pull some of this in down here because it's a nice dark color, and it will stand out a little bit from the copper. So it just gives us a nice crisp reflection there. Now I'm just trying to figure out how many more reflections I want in that vase. I think I want a little red. I'll pick up one of these colors, I think. One of the mixed ones. I think I want a little yellow ochre in that back on the vase too. And maybe a little bit of the burnt sienna and ultramarine, just to add a little bit of interest in the coffee there, or tea, whatever that is. I would think tea, but it looks like it might be, from the photo, it might be a little coffee. It can be whatever, put whatever you want in your cup. And then I just need a little bit more shadow, because the vase is standing up, it would cast a little bit of a shadow on the book. You really don't see much of a shadow in the photo, but I do feel like there would be one there, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to use this mix here, the ultramarine and the olive green. Going to add it right up next to the vase, a little bit thicker when we get over here to the left hand side. I'm going to put the color down put as much color down that I think I want. And then I'm going to grab a clean brush and spread it out. Now I think I am going to use a little gel pen for some final highlights. And then I think we'll be done. Could put a little bit more color on maybe I'll do a little wash of color on the curtains too before we finish up here.
Or you could do a fun little pattern.
A fun pattern on the curtains?
Get your stamps out.
Get your stamps out. Yeah, that'd be the way to do it. I've already wet it, so we don't have to dry. I don't know what kind of pattern I would put in the curtains. Like an iCat pattern or something?
You just weave. I was kidding.
Hearts? Hearts for Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day.
I know, we'll use up this paint. We'll make it kind of burgundy. There'll be a clean up the paint, clean up the palette type of So this is a wet into wet. I just wet the whole thing and I'm going over it. I didn't do a controlled wash like I did on the flowers because I wanted it softer. And I didn't care if it disturbed the paint underneath. With the flowers, I didn't want to disturb the paint underneath so much, so the controlled wash is just a little bit less likely to lift the color underneath. If I lifted some of this color underneath, that's fine because I had some streaks a little too dark. And that's why I would choose a wash technique like this versus the other wash technique that we did. And I'm going to try to paint in a few wrinkles to kind of offset that big one over there that was way too dark. Nothing's permanent in watercolor as long as you're willing to put the layers in and finish it. There, I do like that better. And also that block's a little more light over there, so I think it works a little more. Okay, oh, and I said I would try lifting some of the color off those pages, so let's see if we can do that. I've got my Maxine's mop. Any small stiff brush will work. I like this because it's got a rounded tip. It's about 1/4 of an inch wide, and it works so much better than anything else I've used for lifting. Hopefully I can lift some of this off. And this is going back to our initial wash. And I don't need to lift much off. And I just fold my paper towel so I can just get it where I want it. And yeah, lifted it a little bit. That's plenty. That's fine. And now I'm going to grab a white gel pen. Oh, you know what? I also have a white pen. Maybe I'll use this. This is actually kind of cool. These are acrylic paint pens. And this is a fine tip Posca pen. I just got these for Christmas. Jason got them for me. And they are fantastic. So we can use that. I think we used them last week in our painting too. I'm going to try not to set my hand in anything that's wet. But I mean, it's like a gel pen on steroids. It's got so much power to it. I know I used it last week because people talked about the scratchy noise it made. Because it does it. You can hear it. You can hear it make a scratchy noise. Let's see if I can do a little bit of the shimmer. These are the fine tip ones. They're really nice, and you can refill them. I realized one of our moderators, Afke, told me about it. She said, you can refill those. And I was like, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's what she said.
Cool.
I don't think it's like, it's kind of not, manufacturer condoned or anything, but if you're going to toss it away anyway, why not give it a try? And you can smudge it. Well, these seem to dry quicker than a gel pen as well. So if you do want to smudge anything out, I recommend you do that right away. All right, so I'm wondering if I want to highlight maybe some of these petals with this a little bit too. I think I will. You could also use colored pencils too if you wanted to bring out some semi-opaque highlights. And you don't have to do this step at all if you don't want to. It's completely up to you.
Debbie Wingo, do liquid watercolors have any advantages?
I think it depends on the way you work. Some people just prefer them. I don't think they have advantages or disadvantages. As long as you get a watercolor that's light fast, if that's important to you. Different products are best for different things. I have the Dr. P.H. Martin Radiance. I have their Radiance and their Hydrus colors, and the Radiance are versatile in the fact that you can use them in an airbrush. You can use them to dye fabric. They have a lot of uses. However, the downside is they're not light fast. You could also use them to refill your water-based pens if you wanted to. The Hydrus ones are light fast. They use the same pigments as your normal watercolor paints. The downside is that you kind of want to use them fresh from the bottle. They don't dry in the palette very well. They get kind of dull when you let them dry in the palette, and they kind of bead up. It's just not that great from working from dry. So it just depends. If you work really large and you want to have a lot of accessible bright color, then they're wonderful for that. So there's no advantage or disadvantage. Quality wise, you can find liquid watercolors that are just as good as your pan and tube colors. It just depends on what you want to do with them. All right, well, I think I'm going to call this done. So
we had a couple questions.
Oh,
with
sure,
the
sure.
pen, what that white pen was again?
Yes, it is a Posca pen. I do believe I linked to this last week if you want to look at last week's video. I also used different colors and used them a little bit more last week if you want to see them in action. And there's also a picture, I don't know if it's on my blog. It's definitely on my Instagram. I don't know if it's on my blog too, but I did a, actually, I might have it right here. I did a picture of a greeting. Oh yeah, I got it right here. I'll show you. I did a bow here. I'll show you in my art journal. Like Christmas bow, and I did that all with the Posca pens. Then I did add a little bit of shadow on the outside with a colored pencil. But those are the colors that were in the 12 color kit that I got on Amazon. Or that actually was on my Amazon wish list, and Jason saw it and he ordered those for me for Christmas. So they're a lot of fun to play with. Though you can get them in different tips. I recommend this fine tip. This fine tip pen because you can get such great detail, but that's what those are. Posca. Any other questions?
We're all caught up.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you so much for hanging out today and painting along. Love to see what you painted. If you're on Instagram, you can tag me at Lindsay Wyrick on Instagram, and I usually see everything there. I don't always see things on other social media for whatever reason, but it does seem to pop up to me when it's shared on Instagram for whatever reason. I'm just not that savvy on social media, I guess. Do you have anything to add before we go?
I don't.
Okay, well, I thank you for hanging out today. Thanks for spending some of your Friday afternoon with us. Until next time, happy crafting.